Hi there, everybody. It's 4 o'clock in New York. This afternoon, once again, our American airwaves are the setting for a confrontation over the First Amendment, a battlefield, really, between autocratic instincts and impulses and pro-democracy forces, so full of courage and cowardice alike. So we'll start at the beginning. Last night, Stephen Colbert began his CBS program with a message he said his lawyers didn't want his viewers to know about. First, just watch that moment. So we'll point something out. You might have noticed that wasn't James Tallarico's picture over Colbert's shoulder. So you understand it was sort of a joke Colbert made about not showing Tallarico on his program. From there, though, Colbert went on to explain the backstory behind the alleged censorship, primarily what he described as new concerns at that network, CBS, over something the Federal Communications Commission recognizes as the equal time provision. Here's what that is. In short, radio and broadcast programs should offer an equal share of time to any candidate in a particular political race during the course of that campaign. Of course, there have always been exceptions, cable news, for instance, and for a very long time, talk shows were exempt as well. But a couple of weeks ago, the FCC, under its chair, Brendan Carr of Jimmy Kimmel fame, issued new guidance that states, in part, quote, a program that is motivated by partisan purposes, for example, would not be entitled to an exemption under longstanding FCC precedent. In other words, Carr, who as recently as 4 days ago said he harbors no regrets for his handling of the Jimmy Kimmel controversy late last year, he's putting networks on notice now that talk shows, like Colbert's show, would now become a target of the Trump administration. We've reached out to the FCC for comment, but they have not responded. As for CBS, the network is today defending its decision, saying this, quote, the Late Show was not prohibited by CBS from broadcasting the interview with Representative James Tallarico. The show was provided legal guidance that the broadcast could trigger the FCC equal time rule for two other candidates, including Representative Jasmine Crockett, and presented options for how the equal time for other candidates could be fulfilled. The Late Show decided to present the interview through its YouTube channel with on-air promotion on the broadcast rather than potentially providing the equal time options. Which brings us back to last night. Stephen Colbert, under corporate and federal pressure, told us the truth, the American people and his audience. Not only that, he actually, as the statement alludes to, posted the interview he went on to conduct with the aforementioned Senate candidate James Tallarico. As his state, Texas, begins early primary voting today. Watch.
Do you mean to cause trouble?
I think that Donald Trump is worried that we're about to flip Texas. And Stephen, this is the party that ran against cancel culture. And now they're trying to control what we watch, what we say, what we read. And this is the most dangerous kind of cancel culture, the kind that comes from the top. Corporate media executives are selling out the First Amendment to curry favor with corrupt politicians. And a threat to any of our First Amendment rights is a threat to all of our First Amendment rights.
By the way, that interview, described by Tallarico as one, as you heard, Donald Trump doesn't want you to see, is up to nearly 2 million views on YouTube in less than a day, while searches for his name on Google have skyrocketed. That's where we start today. Oliver Darcy's here. He's the author of the newsletter Status, covers all things media, the person we turn to. Also joining us, senior political analyst, contributing host on Pod Save America, the host of the podcast Runaway Country, Alex Wagner's here. Also joining us at the table, staff writer at The Atlantic, video podcast host David Frum is at the table. Let me sort of set the table with just a couple of other pieces. I feel like we sort of live in this world of constantly looking and watching at what they're going to do next. But I just want to remind people of who Brendan Carr is. Here he is from back in September talking about Jimmy Kimmel.
Again, we are in the midst of a massive shift in dynamics in the media ecosystem for lots of reasons. Again, including the permission structure that President Trump's election has provided. And I would simply say we're not done yet with seeing the consequences of that shift.
Making no mistake that the politics is driving the policy.
Yeah, I think that's what's actually surprised everyone the most. I mean, I've talked to a lot of former FCC commissioners, FCC chairs. Both Republicans and Democrats have expressed a lot of alarm about how Brennan Carr is behaving as the FCC chair. Never has an FCC chair behaved so brazenly political, really carrying out Donald Trump's agenda. And this is what they're attempting to do, right? They're attempting to intimidate networks, talk shows like Colbert's and Kimmel's, and eliminate, I think, critics from the airwaves. Donald Trump watches these shows quite a bit. He definitely
watches them. He laps them up. I mean, they're obsessed with what's on television.
Exactly, and he wants Brennan Carr to do something about it, and Brennan Carr is doing something about it. He's working to eliminate critics from Donald Trump's air, and that comes in a lot of different forms, whether it's pressuring the affiliates of ABC and saying you guys should really drop Jimmy Kimmel and causing stir there, or by saying that the equal time rule is not going to apply anymore to late night talk show hosts or shows like The View. And so we should be very clear about what's happening here. He is attempting to silence the speech of critics. And what's really sad is that CBS seems to have capitulated here and told Colbert that he was not allowed to have Tallarico on the show last night. Now, CBS is strangely saying that's not what we said, which is also remarkable because
they seem to have spent more time on that statement than they might have spent dealing with the issue. It's a very defensive statement out today.
Well, they're calling arguably their most prominent personality effectively a liar, saying he misled his viewers, because Colbert said in no uncertain terms was he told that he could have Tallarico on the show. They're saying that we just provided legal guidance. So that's remarkable in itself. And we should also note, too, that Colbert is no longer going to be a host, Kamei, because his show is canceled. And that happened during this transaction where Paramount was sold to David Ellison, and they needed to curry favor from the administration. And again, Trump hates Colbert. He hates Kimmel. And so while there's no direct evidence, I suppose, tying those two things together, it sort of presses the imagination to think that Colbert's cancellation had nothing to do with the politics, and he's joked about that as recently as last night.
It takes a figure, though, I think, to narrate this story for the American people, right? Like, I feel like the four of us have been talking about and warning about authoritarianism for maybe 9 years. And I think the attacks on the press are their through line, they're a feature of Trump's time, right? Calling the press the enemy of the people, having, I think the publisher of the New York Times went down the first term to say, look, that puts journalists all over the world in danger. Trump's never cared. To find a person in Colbert willing to not just tell people what's happening, but to show them what's happening, does feel like the plot twist.
I've had a formula for describing many Trump actions, which is they're too sinister to be pathetic, but also too pathetic to be wholly sinister. And that's what's going on here.
Wait, say that again.
Too sinister to be pathetic,
right.
But too pathetic to be wholly sinister.
Yeah.
So you've probably noticed there's no equal time rule for Joe Rogan. He doesn't have to give time to people to say vaccines are good. There's no equal time rule on Fox. There's no equal time rule for Candace Owens. She doesn't have to have a person on to say no, Jews don't eat babies. This rule applies only to technology that existed before the advent of cable. It's a leftover from the radio days. Now, some of your viewers may remember, back in the 1980s, 1986, the Ronald Reagan administration eliminated the so-called fairness doctrine because they said, there's this thing coming called cable. There's this thing coming maybe called the internet. And someday soon, this idea that there are only 3 channels is going to be obsolete. So the government shouldn't regulate. Soon there are going to be dozens, maybe 100, maybe more, maybe an infinite number. The government should not be regulating how much time these infinite channels regulate. And that was to allocate to each person. And that was the free market view. There's going to be technology. The airwaves don't matter. And the airwaves aren't scarce. And so the government shouldn't be telling people. So the only institutions that are regulated now are AM, FM radio and broadcast TV. Unfortunately, those are the media that the president watches. And so Brennan Carr says, my mission here is to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't see things that upset Donald Trump, even though As you saw, 2 million views on YouTube. I mean, as an act of censorship, pathetic. But as an act of Brendan Carr saying to Donald Trump, Donald Trump doesn't know how to use YouTube. I'm going to protect you from what you don't want to see on the medium you use.
Sinister, though.
Sinister, but also pathetic.
Yeah. Brendan Carr's rebuke came not from a Democrat or from really a network, but it came from the public. In the first sort of pre-Minneapolis real act of successful resistance to Trump 2.0, people canceled Disney and Hulu.
Yep.
And Brendan Carr had to walk back.
And the network walked it back. So they realized that they had business interests that were aligned with the public interests.
Right.
On the flip side.
Right.
I gotta say, this time last year, I thought about this morning when I read about Colbert. I was in Hungary. And I was talking to people about how is it that you can live in a tourist-friendly autocracy? Like, how does that work? What does it mean to have state media? How did that happen?
Yeah.
And the answer is you get your friends who are really rich to buy up big institutional media, and either they shut it down or they just gut it to the point that it becomes irrelevant. And that is exactly what is happening here. And while I don't think, in this immediate chapter or with the Kimmel chapter, I absolutely think public blowback is going to be something. What we are witnessing here is really the hastened end of legacy media. Mm-hmm. And you can say what you want. As someone who hosts a podcast and embraces new media with all that I have, there is something to having a newsroom. There is something to having great writers that work for someone like Stephen Colbert, that parody on a national level. Like I don't think that we are at a point yet where we can give up on institutional media. And I think it has really important and funded resources that are not replicated in the new media landscape, and we lose something.
Well, who agrees with you? Donald Trump.
Well,
the reason they're his target, they also have
because he understands their importance.
They're important to culture.
Chamber.
Right now, he's losing culture, though. I mean, I was thinking about where we were a year ago and why this feels different. Why this feels different to me is even over the summer, he was still hovering around the low 40s. He's at 35% and plunging. And so your CBS is appeasing a smaller and smaller and small. I mean, if business success were part of the plan, and who am I to say what anyone's business plan is? I'm just a lowly cable host. But if having more people watch was part of the strategy, they are now speaking in a more brittle and biting way to a shrinking audience.
Well, and that an audience that will never come back. The people that give up right now on Stephen Colbert are never coming back.
They'll go find him wherever he goes.
CBS will not. The people who've given up on the evening news are never coming back to the evening news. So this is a two-pronged assault on the immediate sort of, the freedom of the Fourth Estate, but also on institutional media. That when they capitulate, they lose viewers. And so goes institutional media. Anderson Cooper's leaving 60 Minutes. He says it's to spend more time with his family. I question whether that's the entire story. You may lose other correspondents. I mean, you are seeing the second part of the playbook that they run in Hungary, which is atrophy it so that it's either no longer recognizable or relevant at all. And then we are left with a very atomized media landscape, which, yes, is great for people who are trying new things out and have spunk and zeal, but we do need newsrooms. And it's great to have late night writers, and that has not yet been replicated.
I want to pick up on the Anderson Cooper point. Whatever his reasons are, and he did state that he left to spend time with his young family, it does leave 60 Minutes. And I've read some of your reporting, other reporting, that 60 Minutes feels that it's being sort of pulled apart and left as a shell of what it was once.
The morale at 60 Minutes, it just cannot be overstated, is so low. I mean, I've talked to a number of people familiar with the dynamics inside that show. It is, they were at the basement before. It's like they're drilling lower than the basement. Like it is very, very low. Anderson Cooper now leaving is dealing another blow to the morale there. I think more correspondents likely are probably on their way out. It's hard to imagine Sharon Alfonsi, who Barry Weiss, the editor-in-chief there now.
She was the journalist behind the censored
CCOT story. And Barry Weiss does not think very highly of her, to my understanding, so hard to imagine that she's going to be there for the long haul. The morale is very low. My understanding, too, by the way, is while Anderson Cooper did officially say that his family, he'd like to spend more time with his young family, is that Barry Weiss certainly played a role. He had grown disillusioned with the direction the network is taken under Barry Weiss, and this is according to two people familiar with his decision-making process. he didn't need to be associated with that show. He really liked his nearly 2 decades on that show, but he also probably didn't want to be part of wherever Barry Weiss is directing that ship. And so he decided to, jump overboard. And I think you're going to see others leave that show as well. And back to the CBS thing, this is obviously not good for CBS's business, right? Like people
I didn't
want
think
Colbert.
so,
He's a top-rated host there. He's
yeah.
a top-rated, the king of late night. They like him. They like 60 Minutes. It's a top-rated news program. And you're seeing David Ellison, who owns this company, really destroy these institutions.
Let me ask you, though, about that. So he bought a company whose most valuable assets include Colbert and 60 Minutes. Why destroy the most valuable thing in the thing you bought?
Well, he's trying to curry favor right now with Donald Trump because he has a much larger deal he wants to get done. So today, Warner Brothers Discovery, which owns CNN, HBO, the Warner Brothers Picture Studio, they said they will re-engage with talks with Paramount, which David Ellison owns and which owns CBS, to see if they can come up with a deal maybe where David Ellison would then purchase Warner Brothers Discovery. That's a huge deal. He would own 2 Hollywood studios. He would own CNN. He would own HBO. Like a lot of treasure in the Warner Brothers Discovery case there. And so he wants that deal to go through. And his main argument to shareholders of Warner Brothers Discovery is pick my deal because I am friendly with this administration. I am friendly with Donald Trump, and I can get this deal across the regulatory, finish line. And so he needs Donald Trump in his corner right now more than anything. And so if he has to capitulate and if he has to move CBS News in a rightward direction and if he has to take, Colbert off the air or not allow him to have the, the guest that he'd like or whatever it may be, they do not want to run afoul of this administration. And I think that's the backdrop to a lot of decisions. So not good for CBS, but I think if you're thinking about this from the 30,000-foot perspective, to them it makes business sense.
I don't understand, though, where they think cannibalized brands go to die.
Yeah.
I get that you want all this stuff, but if you're the person, we don't live in the same country we lived in when the merger happened. We live in a country where, for a lot of Americans, the killing of 2 Americans in Minneapolis hardened their views. They didn't become more open to Trump-friendly corporations. They became more opposed. There are grassroots boycotts. I have Scott Galloway on this week with the big tech boycotts. There are more people boycotting ICE enablers and Trump-friendly corporations, not fewer.
One of the ways that authoritarian regimes get themselves in trouble is they cut themselves off from knowing bad news in time. Because they demand endless flattery of the leader does not know that there aren't sausages in the shops. And so what Brendan Carr is doing here is actually among the people